Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Outsider's Point of View. Thanks for taking the time to watch today's video. I really appreciate you being here. Today we're diving into a question that I think a lot of people around the world have wondered about. What's the deal with Americans and their obsession with freedom? You've probably heard Americans go on and on about liberty, independence, and being the land of the free. But what does that actually mean, and how did it all start? We're going to take a journey through American history to understand where this freedom obsession comes from, who it originally applied to, and why Americans still can't stop talking about it today. Trust me, the story is way more complicated and contradictory than you might think. I've broken this down into 5 key parts that will help explain the whole picture, from America's break with Britain all the way to the freedom debates happening right now. If you find this interesting and want to see more content like this, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you're new here, consider subscribing for more deep dives into topics that help explain how the world works. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What other topics would you like me to explore? What questions do you have about American culture or any other subject? All right, let's get started with the story of American freedom. So Americans are always talking about freedom, right? But freedom from what exactly? To understand this obsession, we need to go back to the 1770s when America wasn't even America yet. It was just a collection of British colonies. The colonists were ruled by King George III from across the Atlantic Ocean. Britain treated these colonies like a giant cash machine. They could only trade with Britain, had to buy British goods, and were taxed without having any say in British Parliament. The famous slogan was "No taxation without representation." When the colonists declared independence in 1776, they weren't just breaking away, they were rejecting the entire idea of kings and royal rule. They claimed that governments should get their power from the people, not from God-appointed monarchs. This was revolutionary thinking for the time. How did the British feel about this? They were furious. They'd spent a fortune defending these colonies from French attacks, and now the colonists were refusing to pay taxes and declaring independence. From Britain's perspective, this was pure rebellion and ingratitude. They fought a 7-year war to keep control, but ultimately lost what they considered their most valuable overseas territory. This is where America's freedom obsession began, not just as independence from Britain, but as a rejection of the whole idea that some people are born to rule over us. That's the thing that confuses a lot of people outside America. Most countries today are democracies with similar freedoms. So why do Americans act like they invented freedom itself? Well, in the late 1700s, America really was unique. Most of the world was still ruled by kings, emperors, and aristocrats. America created the first large-scale republic in modern times, a country where, in theory, ordinary people could govern themselves. The idea that a farmer or shopkeeper could become president was mind-blowing back then. For the next 2 centuries, America marketed itself as the land where anyone could succeed if they worked hard enough. Millions of immigrants came believing this promise. The American dream became about more than just political freedom. It was about economic opportunity and social mobility. Today, when Americans talk about freedom, they often mean something broader than just voting rights. They're talking about economic freedom, religious freedom, the freedom to own guns, freedom of speech, even the freedom to fail. It's become part of the national identity. The idea that America offers more personal liberty than anywhere else. The irony is that many countries now offer similar or even greater freedoms in some areas. But Americans often don't realize this because the freedom narrative is so deeply embedded in how they see themselves and their country's role in the world. Now here's where the story gets really complicated. While the founders were writing about freedom and equality, they were simultaneously practicing slavery on a massive scale. When they wrote "all men are created equal," they literally meant only white men, and usually only those who owned property. By 1860, there were nearly 4 million enslaved people in America. That's about 13% of the entire population living in bondage, while the country celebrated its freedom. Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration of Independence, owned over 600 enslaved people during his lifetime. Meanwhile, Native Americans were being systematically removed from their ancestral lands. The same government that proclaimed liberty was destroying indigenous nations and forcing people from their homes. The freedom to expand westward meant the destruction of Native American freedom. Women couldn't vote, couldn't own property in many places, and were considered legal dependents of their husbands or fathers. The freedom that America celebrated was essentially freedom for white men only. This wasn't an accident or oversight. It was a deliberate choice. The founders knew about these contradictions. They chose to prioritize their vision of freedom for some over freedom for all. This created a tension that would define American history for centuries. The gap between the ideals of freedom and the reality of who actually got to enjoy it The contradictions finally exploded in the 1860s with the Civil War. The northern states fought the southern states partly over slavery, though it was complicated by economics and politics too. Over 600,000 Americans died in this war. You can hear more about this in my other video. More than in any other American conflict, the war ended slavery, but it didn't end racism. For the next century, Black Americans faced legal segregation, violence, and systematic exclusion from the American dream of freedom and opportunity. The 1950s and 60s brought the civil rights movement. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. used America's own freedom rhetoric against the country, basically saying, "You promised liberty and justice for all. We're here to collect on that promise." Women fought for decades to get the vote, finally winning that right in 1920. Later, the women's liberation movement of the 1960s and 70s challenged traditional gender roles and fought for equal opportunities in work and society. Each generation has had to fight to expand who gets included in American freedom. The story isn't just about the founders creating freedom. It's about excluded groups demanding their share of it. Workers organizing for better conditions, immigrants fighting for citizenship rights, LGBTQ+ Americans winning marriage equality. This ongoing struggle is actually central to understanding American freedom today. It's not a finished product. It's an ongoing project of making the original promises real for more and more people. So, where does this leave American freedom today? The truth is, it's still complicated and contradictory. Americans continue to debate what freedom actually means and who deserves it. Economic inequality has grown dramatically. While America promises that anyone can succeed, the reality is that where you're born and your family's wealth heavily influence your opportunities. Some argue this limits real freedom for millions of Americans. The country built by immigrants now has intense debates about immigration. The land of the free has some of the world's highest incarceration rates. These contradictions between ideals and reality persist. Meanwhile, many other countries now offer similar or greater freedoms in areas like healthcare access, education, worker protections, and social mobility. The American claim to be uniquely free is harder to sustain in today's world. Perhaps most importantly, Americans themselves can't agree on what freedom means anymore. Some emphasize individual liberty and minimal government. Others focus on collective rights and government programs that provide security and opportunity. These different visions of freedom are at the heart of American political divisions today. The American obsession with freedom isn't really about having achieved perfect liberty. It's about being founded on the promise of it. Every generation inherits both the inspiring ideals and the ongoing struggle to make them real. That's probably why Americans still talk about freedom so much, because they're still trying to figure out what it actually means and how to achieve it for everyone. The question for America going forward is whether it can live up to its own promises, or whether the gap between ideals and reality will continue to define the American story. So, if you're an American watching this, it may be a hard pill to swallow, or you might be proud of everything that America has become. For the rest of us outsiders, I hope you found this interesting and insightful. If so, let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed it, I would be honored if you could like and subscribe. See you next time.